Return of the Exiled, or Why Must I Be the Hero? By T.J. Stegaheis. Read by YOB. Dedicated to Kurt Reimert, whose stories inspired this work. Requiescat in pace. Chapter 5. Smoke. Escape! Reflecting on his past might help the wait, but Smoke had to find a way to get his skin out of here if he wished to keep it. He looked calculatingly at the dungeon door. How to get himself on the other side of that door? That was the puzzle he needed to solve, and soon. A dungeon like this one was not a healthy place for someone in his profession. As he regarded the door, it opened, and a young girl, unconscious and undressed, was thrown into the room. A guard threw her clothes in after her. Then the door slammed shut amid the sounds of the guard's laughter. Smoke had one weakness that he always regretted. He could not just walk away from those worse off than himself. He had once given the entire profits of a burglary job to a woman with 2 children who was being thrown out of her home. The guildmaster locked him up for many days for that. Now he approached the girl who was just coming awake, getting her bearings and realizing that she had no clothes on. He offered her one of the few things he had smuggled in, his sewing stuff. He went even further by advising her to move over to where the women gathered for protection. He was such a mark sometimes. After the girl had repaired her clothes and he had retrieved his needles, Smoke went nearer to where the men gathered. Not too close, as the men of Riston City had never held him in much regard, and often beat him if they could catch him. Like all gnomes, he was stronger than he appeared, but that was hardly enough to fend off all the men if they pinned him. He depended much more on his ability to wriggle loose or flee, or better still, to avoid being there when the trouble started. That would not be an option here in this dungeon. The men were, of course, discussing ways to escape, with no good idea of how to pull it off. Suddenly there was a commotion from the upper halls, and someone was shouting for guards. Smoke crept as near to the door as he felt was wise, and listened. Most people went to see things, but he knew that to a trained ear, the sounds people made often told more than what could be seen, especially if these people did not want you to know what they were doing. After a few moments, he crept back to where the men were discussing what the commotion might be. He coughed politely. They ignored him. He said, "Excuse me," in his best civilized manner. Still no response. Typical, he thought. Finally, he went over to the largest man and said rather loudly, "I know something you do not." The man glared down at him. Smoke ignored the look and jerked a thumb at the door, saying softly, "They only left one guard." The man moved his mouth as if to berate him when it sank in. "We need a plan," he said to the man in the center, who seemed to be the leader of the group. "What?" he responded, having been speaking to another man. "What do you know, Riff?" The big man responded, "He says that there is only one guard left," he said, nodding at Smoke. "If we can get to him somehow, the others won't be able there to stop us." "He won't open the door if he sees us," said the leader. "How do we lure him in? With a woman, maybe?" "No," said Smoke. "We only have to lure him to the door. There isn't a bottom window on the door, so Riff and I can hide and wait. When he comes to the door, if Riff can hold him to the door, I can get the keys and open the door. Then everybody who wants out had better be ready to take him once the door is open. But we must be quick before the rest of the guards come back." The leader looked at him a moment and asked, "And the lure?" "Your idea of a woman sounds best to me," Smoke said diplomatically. "There is a young wench who just arrived, and she would be perfect." So it was that Smoke found himself once again going to the women's group and asking to speak to the girl.
"Don't you do it," an elderly woman spat. "He only wants one thing."
"I understand your fear, good woman," said Smoke, "but we are putting together an escape, and we need a lure to get the one remaining guard to come to the door, so we can capture him." The men had asked him not to tell the plan, but Smoke knew that the women would not trust anything not fully in their interest or fully explained. He was right. The women turned inward and discussed the matter, and quickly they agreed that one of them should act as bait. Smoke waited. If a revulsion was too strong, the young woman might not do it, and an older woman would not work as well as a tender young girl. They spoke to her, and to his relief, she said yes. The woman coached her for a moment, and everyone got into position. Then she went into her act. Truthfully, it wasn't much, but amazing considering what she had just been through. The girl called out her need for a man, and the guard could not resist. As planned, he came up to the door to see the spectacle. Riff moved in quickly and had him by the neck. Smoke got his arm through, but the guard kept swinging his body away from his reach. Then the guard pushed up to the door so he could brace himself against it and push. Smoke got the keys, got one fit into the padlock on the outside of the door. Just then the guard pushed free. He had the lock open, but slipped and fell back into the cell. One of the ruffians stopped ogling the girl to laugh at him. Smoke knew that the door must open now if they were to have any chance of freedom, so he bounced right back up and shook the door, so the padlock fell off. Riff reached back through it and tossed the bar free. The guard rushed up to replace the bar. Riff and Smoke pushed with all they had, and the door opened, knocking the guard back to the far wall. The original plan was to lock him in the cell they just left, but the outflow of people made that impossible. The leader, whose name was Sard, pointed to a door just down the hall, and they dragged him there. "You can't do this," the guard said. "I'll have you all whipped." "Gag him," ordered Sard simply. "You are all under arrest for trying to escape," continued the man. "Someone gag him now," said Sard more commandingly. A man called Bud tore off his sleeve and stuffed it into the man's mouth and tied it there. They hurried to the door. When the door opened, 3 guards stood there staring at them. Apparently not the well-disciplined kind of guards. They were drinking wine, had their gambesons wide open, and only one of them wore a helmet. These 3 had obviously been going through someone's belongings, and the prisoners had caught them by surprise. Before Sard or anyone could decide what to do, the bait girl, who had tagged along, screamed and snatched up 2 knives from the table, laying into the nearest guard like something out of the pit itself. The first guard had no chance and was gruesomely cut down. The second grabbed up a club and tried to defend himself. The club bounced off her head as she went under and sliced open his stomach, spilling his innards. The third guard picked up a sword, and she merely shoved it aside and cut his throat. In the space of 2 breaths, they were dead, the last one gurgling messily as he bled out. 2 of the men with them vomited. One ruffian made a choking noise and looked away. The one called Riff swore. The girl, bleeding from her head and hand, blood splattered all over her, collapsed to the floor, while all the men stared, dumbfounded. Sard was the first to recover. "Tie him up," he said, pointing to the guard they had brought with him. The men cooperated without a word. The girl opened her eyes and pushed herself to a sitting position. "What happened?" she said. Smoke, for once in his life, could think of nothing to say. "You did," Sard replied simply, and began looking for weapons. The girl looked at the carnage as if she had never seen it before. All Smoke could think to say was, "Are you unhurt?" "I guess so," she said. "Did I really kill them?" "You sure did. I've never seen anything like it. Are you a warrior?" he asked. She looked at him for a moment before answering, "Yes." Somehow Smoke felt that she was not telling the truth, despite the evidence he had just witnessed. "This is my pack," she said. "Where is my bundle?" "There's no time for that," said Sard, as he donned a brigandine. "We may have to fight our way out." "Here it is," she said, and stuck an oilcloth parcel in her pack, along with a pair of boots and a blanket. "Has anyone seen my sword?" "Are you telling us that you have a sword?" said Riff, and then quickly looked away. "I found it," she said, ignoring him and pulling a light sword from under the table. Sard and the others had found swords, axes, and were ready to go. Smoke realized that he had been watching the girl instead of looking for gear, and quickly grabbed a hatchet. It was the first thing he could find, snatched a knife from one of the fallen guards, and followed the others out. The girl put on her pack as she followed the men down the dark passage. There was the sound of heavy shod feet from the stairs. So they went the other way until an ancient archway loomed on one side of the hallway. It was low and difficult to manage. Smoke looked across the passage from the arch and saw high windows with wide spaced bars, just enough space that he might have made it out. But for some reason, he stayed with the group and passed through the archway and down into an ancient flight of crumbling stone steps to a lower passage. When they got there, they found the space wet, dirty, and unused. There were 3 rooms with heavy but unlatched doors, all filthy and long deserted. Against one wall stood a stack of firewood covered in cobwebs. Smoke went further down the hallway, and it seemed a dead end. Why spend the time and money to build a passage to nowhere? He wondered, and looked more closely. There was an arched support spanning across it just the length of his 2 outstretched arms from the end of the passage. On the side opposite the rooms, he found an ancient hook sticking out of the wall, about head high. Well, okay, a bit of a stretch, but head high for humans. He pulled on it, and nothing happened. He tried twisting it and heard it click promisingly. He pulled again, and it didn't budge. He pushed and nearly fell into the black space that suddenly opened up. The man called Bud came over with a torch, their only one, and stuck it into the passage revealed. They saw a lot of steps going down beyond their sight. Down, said Sard simply. So down they all went into the unknown passageway, and of course the torch went out. Sard quickly commanded them to go further down the dark stairs. After a while they stopped to listen. I have a candle, said the girl. Shh, Smoke hissed to her. They went some ways further down the stairs. After a bit, Sard asked for the candle and somehow lit it. They continued down what seemed an endless extent of stairs. They ended up in an ancient hall, imperially grand, inconceivably old, an alien to any that Smoke had ever been in. Piles of rotten wood showed that it had at one time been used for storage, but not in recent times. One end was collapsed and impassable. He momentarily examined the masonry before again set off down the vast chamber. The stonework was, like the murals, was superior and strange, not human, not dwarven. The hall went on for several hundred feet before ending. Once again, Smoke found a secret door, and on they went. As usual, no one thanked him. Beyond this, a short passageway degenerated into a series of caves. Trying to pick the most upward of these, they continued. Soon Sard was asking for another candle and somehow got one. After a few hours and the occasional rest stop, the passage they were following opened into a crypt. A very dead end, said Smoke to himself. I hope that isn't the only reason they built this, said Sard. Smoke hoped so too, as their last candle was almost gone. Bud had set it on the blade of his dagger to keep from burning his fingers. Moving through a series of crypts, they discovered a wooden door much newer than most of the construction down here. Praying that this let out, they forced it open. As soon as they were all in the room beyond, they found themselves immobilized by a magical force. Facing them was an angry-faced young woman in the robes of a priestess. The candle died just at this point. Where did you come from, and what is your purpose here? She demanded. At first the men refused to answer, but as they stubbornly held their tongues, a sharp pain crept up the legs of each in a slow and threatening manner. We are escaping the guards who robbed and imprisoned us, burst out someone. It sounded trite, but the priestess accepted it. The pain vanished. Smoke was likely more relieved than most of them. The priestess opened a small lantern, and they could see each other. You are not allowed down here. How did you get past the warders? She inquired. We know of no warders, said Sard. We found a secret stair from the dungeon, and we found ourselves here. You came from the fortress in Riston? She marveled. Then there's a tunnel under the ancient crypt. Sard would have said more, but she held up a hand to silence him. A slight sound from up the nearby stairs told them that they had company. Wait here, she commanded, and set down the lantern and fled up the stairs. Smoke looked around to get an idea of the lay of the nature of this place. An underground storage room filled with various supplies for whatever structure stood above them. Other doors on this level seemed to be just other rooms here. The stair was likely the only way out other than how they arrived. Some time later the priestess returned with food, water, and an offer. "If you can help me get to Tai through the tunnels," she said, "I can get you passage on a ship to Shusha and freedom." They could only accept. Later she returned with sleeping mats and blankets. "You should sleep here, lest someone discover you and I not be able to convince them of your usefulness." After she left, Smoke overheard Sard telling someone, "She's not telling her superiors about us. This may be a bargaining point." During the night, Smoke satisfied his curiosity and supply needs by shadowing the bait girl. She, too, was helping herself to what she needed. She'd make a fair thief with a little training. Smoke slipped quietly back into his blanket so she would not notice him. The next morning the priestess set them a breakfast of oat bread, honey, and ale. She also brought a young mage. "This is Tennard," she introduced him, "and he will be joining us." Tennard joined them for breakfast and as a traveling companion. After breakfast the priestess finally introduced herself as Dobrina, mentioning no family or house. As they re-entered the crypt and sought out the path of the previous day, Sard led them by following their tracks. But before they could find back the passage they had come up through, they encountered the guardian of the crypt, an enormous snake with a woman's head and fangs. It was transparent and obviously a creature of spirit, but it saw them and proved to be powerful enough to halt their progress. "Who are you, and why do you disturb the dead?" she demanded. "We mean no harm, nor do we mean to disturb the honored dead," returned Dobrina. "We are trying to retrace the steps of yesterday and get these people back and out onto the road to Tai." The priestess and the creature spoke at length, and it was decided to take a different route that would not involve fighting their way past the city guards. Once in the cave passages they encountered rats the size of small dogs. Fortunately, as Dobrina waved her Ankh symbol around, the rats retreated. Afterwards they reached the tunnel the guardian had told them about. The new tunnel was low and twisting, but not so long. Soon enough they emerged through an old well near the ruins of a watchtower on a hill. The morning sun was a welcome sight. They were beyond the walls of Riston City and could see the south road near the bottom of the hill. The city wall was an impressive sight just to the north of them. To the west, a few distant farms could be seen. To the east was only pasture land, and the forest blocked most of the view to the south. Sard took no chances and had Smoke and two others scout the area before they set out. He would not chance trouble so close to making good their escape. No sooner had the scouts departed than Dobrina and Sard began the first of many arguments as to who was in charge on their little expedition. Smoke was glad that there were no patrols in the area, as one could hear the arguing voices of Sard and Dobrina from the base of the hill. Smoke listened to their exchange and decided that Dobrina was unskilled at insults, but her anger filled in for her inexperience. Sard, on the other hand, was trying to be firm while telling her that she could not order his men around as if they were servants. He implied that she could do no such thing because she was a woman. Smoke cringed and set about scouting the area further down the road. Many of the trees had lost their leaves, and he had to be careful. They paralleled the roads to Tai and avoided people as much as possible. The journey proved to be remarkably uneventful, if you don't count the bickering, and within a few weeks they were approaching the coastal city of Tai, one-time capital of Tor. As they moved through the city, Dobrina recommended that they split up, and for once Sard agreed. Smoke took the opportunity to visit the local thieves' guild and present evidence against Bane. The guildmaster, a gnome named Plamen, took this surprisingly calmly and asked if he had any proof. Although Smoke had gotten the names of two of the guards who were in on the trap, he had no real proof. The guildmaster thanked Smoke and said that the brothers in Riston would have Bane watched to see if he proved to be a traitor. Meanwhile, he strongly recommended that Smoke leave Tai and be slow in returning. Smoke agreed after paying his dues and respect, left by unwatched ways. Plamen did not become guildmaster by being kind and gentle. He stopped by his local hiding place, a carefully walled-off section of a wealthy man's cellar, entered through an old forgotten trap door in the woodshed. There he retrieved a few necessities, a parcel of papers he expected to be worth a nice sum to the right party. These papers were another reason he needed to be away from Ty. A quick bath and a change of clothes, and he felt like a new gnome. The contents of somebody's pocket bought him a nice meal. An inattentive butcher meant that he had some sausages for the journey. Later he rejoined the rest of them down by the docks, where a fisherman had agreed to take them as far as he could into Sersha for a fee. Smoke was unable to swim and disliked small boats, but if it got him out of Tor, he'd go along. Besides, a certain first mate had narrowed his options, and time was not something he wanted to waste.